What's up, guys? It's me, Grey Wolf, back to do another video for you. I apologize for the gap in videos. I know I haven't put one out for a while. I really just haven't been into to doing them lately. Really haven't been into RCs all that much lately. I've been taking a break, playing some League of Legends, you know, some other stuff. Been watching Game of Thrones with my wife. We've just discovered that show. I've heard about it, you know, for quite a while now, and a lot of the guys at work talk about it, and I finally decided that I needed to find out what all the hype was about, so I downloaded the first 3 seasons, and my wife and I have been watching those quite a bit. At any rate, this video here is going to be on soldering Deans connectors. Now, a lot of you guys probably already know how to solder Deans connectors, but I wanted to do a video on soldering Deans connectors. I started to do one before, a long time ago, probably a year ago or whatever, and I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do that because there's quite a few Deans, you know, how-to videos out there already, and most people already know how to solder them. But I was like, you know what, I want to go ahead and do one, not only because, you know, there's probably, I'm sure there's people out there that are, you know, new to the hobby and can, you know, benefit by a Deans soldering video, but also I just wanted to kind of share some of the tips and tricks that I've picked up for soldering Deans connectors, especially when it concerns soldering them onto lipos. Lord knows I've shorted out more than my fair share of lipos and taken chunks out of wire cutters and stuff because I wasn't thinking, and I tried to cut both the red and the black wires at the same time. Just, you know, granted that was back when I think that was the very first lipo, or maybe the second lipo I'd ever tried to do or whatever. But I picked up several tips and tricks on how to do them, better, and I just want to share those tips and tricks with you guys. So one of the biggest problems, and I know some people don't like Deans connectors because they say they're, you know, there's a couple of reasons why people say they don't like Deans connectors. One is because they say they're too hard to solder. Some people say that they don't like Deans connectors because they're too hard to pull apart. You know, there's a little bit of a learning curve when soldering with Deans, simply because the Deans connectors, and I'm just showing the Deans connectors here for people that aren't familiar with them already. As you can tell, let's see if I can get it to focus there. There we go. As you can tell, there are metal blades inside this plastic housing. So one of the reasons why people say they're hard to solder is because if you leave heat on these too long, you can actually melt the plastic housing, you know, where it connects, or where it you know, where it's holding the metal blades in place, and it can become loose, and the connection won't be, you know, all that great. Basically, if you do that, you kind of screwed up the Deans, and you really got to start over. Although you usually don't realize you've done that until you start running into problems with the, you know, with the lipo. But so that's one of the things there. And, to address the second issue, you know, people saying that they're too hard to pull apart, I actually like to use generic Deans, and I like to use the generic Deans. Oops. I like to use the generic Deans connectors that have these ridges on the sides. Now, these are Deans compatible. They will work with actual Dean plugs. They're just basically Chinese clones of the Deans plugs. But the ones with ridges are much easier to get a hold of and pull them apart. They don't necessarily slip through your fingers as badly as the actual smooth Deans connectors. Another tip that I can throw out there that I did not know for the longest time. For the longest time, I was buying these connectors off of eBay, and not only these connectors, but Tamiya connectors, JR connectors, Futaba connectors, bullet connectors, the whole 9 yards. I was buying all my connectors off of eBay because I thought that that was the cheapest place to get them. Well, lo and behold, and again, a lot of you guys may have discovered this already for yourselves, but I just discovered, like, I don't know, maybe 4, 5, 6 months ago, that Hobby King actually has all of those connectors dirt cheap. They have these connectors here, the generic Deans with the ridges and stuff. You can actually buy 10 pairs of these. That's 10 males and 10 females for like $3.50. It's like way cheaper than even eBay sells them. I was severely overpaying for these for a long time. And it's the same thing with the rest of them. You know, Futaba connectors especially. I seem to use a lot of Futaba connectors, and I was paying, I want to say I was paying around $6 to $8, something like that, for 10 Deans, or not Deans, I'm sorry, 10 Futaba connectors off of eBay. And you can get 10 of them off of Hobby King for like, I want to say it's $1 or $2 for 10 of them. So Hobby King, and they're all good quality. I've used original JR connectors, I've used original Futaba connectors, I've used original Deans, I've used original, they even have Castle 6.5 millimeter bullet connectors. I'm sorry, they're not actual Castles. They are you know, Chinese clones, but they do have 6.5 millimeter bullet connectors that are Castle compatible. I've ordered them. I've tried them with my actual Castle ones. They're completely the same. So look at Hobby King for all your connectors, because you can get them dirt cheap. So that's one tip. A couple tips actually. But so what I'm going to show you in this video, apart from some other tricks, is I'm going to show you how to solder Deans and get the solder applied quickly before the housing heats up enough to melt. In fact, the housing shouldn't heat up very much at all once you get the hang of this technique. So before I move on to actually doing the Deans connectors, I do want to share another trick. I've got 5 lipos to do, so that's why I figured I'd go ahead and do this video. And why so many of these, why so many battery packs come with these type of connectors, I don't know, but because I hate these connectors. They're so big and bulky. I know they're good for conductivity and whatnot, but whatever. At any rate, one of the things that I do when I'm doing lipos in particular is I only cut and tin one side at a time. That way they don't, you know, these wires don't accidentally touch and short on each other, or, you know, anything like that. So what I'll end up doing is I'll end up tinning both sides of my Deans, and I'll end up tinning this wire, and I will end up attaching this wire to the Deans and then heat shrinking it before I ever cut this other wire off. Now, yes, it does take a little bit more time to do it that way, because if there wasn't the fear of shorting, I would prefer to cut both of these off at the same time, tin them at the same time, tin the Deans all at the same time, and then just solder everything up together. It is a little bit faster that way. This is much safer. I have ruined expensive 4 and 6S lipos from accidentally shorting them out. Well, technically that's not entirely true. I only ruined one. It was a 4S, but I did short a 6S also. Luckily, it didn't seem to affect the battery at all. However, it did take a giant chunk out of the needle nose pliers that I was holding the one side with. But at any rate, I find this, even though it's a little more time consuming, much safer, so you don't short out your lipos, or don't short them on something. Now, before you start tinning your Deans, what I like to do is I like to take a file, and I basically like to rough up the edges that I'm going to be soldering, because it makes the solder stick much easier. I just run that across there till it's good and scored, and I actually do the edges. I do the edges of the connectors and the tops of them. I do that all. I prep all those sides. The only side that I don't score is the underside. And basically the theory is, once you get your solder on the connector, then if there's any overflow, like say you pool a little too much solder or whatever on the connector, and some people actually, I've seen videos where some people actually say that it's preferable to have the solder cover the sides and the end. I don't think it really matters, but if you do get a little too much pooled on there and you solder your wire on and it spills over the edge just a little bit, it actually grabs onto the edge and sticks very well since it's scored. So that's really about all the tips that I have for prepping and kind of how I do things. So I'm just going to kind of get into this here and show you guys how I actually tin. Let me zoom in here. What I like to do is I like to get a pair of needle nose, and I like to use junk ones for this because I don't know, just because I don't like to use my good ones. But so what I do is I clamp it in. So I'm gonna solder the negative. I've actually already tinned. I've actually already tinned the positive side on this one. Now I'm going to tin the negative side. So what I'll do is I keep two sets of pliers handy. If you're doing multiple Deans connectors, I keep two sets of vice grips handy. And I keep one set to the size of the width, and I keep the other one set to the size of the, or I should say, the height, and then the width. And that way when I'm tinning, I'll just go through and I'll tin all 5 of them with this particular vice grip, and I'll tin all the negatives, and then I'll switch to the other vice grip, flip them all up, right side up, and then tin all the positives. And I just go through them like that. Technically I did these in reverse. I've got all the positives done already. Now I'm in the process of doing the negatives, but I only need to show you one different, or one side. So I prop it up on something. These I got a set of EXI turnbuckle wrenches that I like to prop it up on to keep it off the table. And basically what I'm going to do, get this camera over here a little better. So basically what I'm going to do, and you know what, my overhead shot's probably not going to be all that great, so I'm going to fade out right here, and I'm going to come back, and I'm actually going to use my main camera to do a close-up of this so you guys can see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm back, and as you can see, you can get a much better picture here of how I use the file to score the side of the connector. Now, before I actually do this, I'm just going to give you guys a brief explanation of what I'm doing. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm just using the solder as a pointer at the moment, I'm going to apply heat with my soldering iron at the midpoint of this tab. And then what I'm going to do with the soldering iron there, let me back up for a second. First off, I'm going to pre-tin my iron. which if you soldered at all, you know you should always pre-tin your iron anyway, but just wanted to point that out. You want to pre-tin your iron first, and then I'm going to apply heat right here in the middle of the tab. Now while I've got the heat there, I'm actually going to take the solder at that point, and I'm going to start, I'm basically going to touch the tab and the end of the soldering iron at the same time, which will essentially start immediate solder flow onto the tab. And what I'm going to do as the solder pulls up here, you know, in this beginning portion of the tab, as it begins to pull up there, I'm going to pull the soldering iron back, and then I'm going to pull, I'm going to finish pulling solder on, you know, all the way out to the end of the tab until I've got a nice little blob of solder that covers the entire tab. And it happens pretty quick because since the solder ends up flowing almost instantly, it actually only takes 3 or 4 seconds to tin the entire tab, which is ideal because then you don't get excess buildup. So here I'm applying heat. I'm going to put the solder where the thing is. It's pulling up now. Now I'm going to pull back, pull it, and then pull off, just like that fast. And as you can tell, it's got a nice shiny coat of tin wire on there now. So once you do that, then if you're doing multiple ones, like I said, I'll just switch to the next one. And I'm going to go ahead and do one more for you guys since I've got it here and I got one more to do anyway. I'll go ahead and do one more for you guys so you can see. So just in case. So I just tinned my iron, placing the iron in the middle of the tab, instantly melting solder. It's pulling up, I'm pulling back. Bam. And I actually got a little bit hanging over the edge there, but that's okay. That's not a big deal. You can actually go back and after it cools off for a few seconds, or well, ideally you should let it cool off for a minute or two, but see, if I can touch this and it's not even hot, it's barely even warm. That's how quickly you can tin these. And as long as you can tin this without getting this housing hot, then that's really the only hard part about you know, about soldering these Deans connectors. But anyway, like I was saying, if you want, once this thing cools down, or if it's like mine's not even really that warm already, you can go back in, and if you get a little rough edge on there, you can just take your iron and kind of clean it up. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and get some heat shrink tubing, and I'm gonna go ahead and solder the one side for you guys to see. The one side is actually going to be, well, I'm not just one side, but actually, so once you get them tinned, you know, actually soldering the wires to them is very easy. So I'm just going to cut off some heat shrink tubing here. And for 12 gauge wire, that like what comes on the Genzace lipos, I like using what is this, 5mm? I think this is 5mm. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, let me back up for a second here. Alright, before I do that, I'm actually going to tin the wire. And the easiest way camera here. The easiest way to tin the wires with a pair of helping hands. Anybody that solders is probably familiar with helping hands. And I'm not, the only reason that I'm showing you this isn't because I'm not going to demonstrate on how to tin wire, but I want to show one thing. When I tin my wires, regardless of what it's for, I don't like, one of the things that I tend to get, especially with thicker wire that doesn't heat up quite as quickly, is teeth marks in the rubber, or in the silicone rather. I don't like the teeth marks from the alligator clips in there. So what I like to do is I like to take a little piece of cardboard, just thin cardboard, doesn't have to be thick, just a little piece. I think this was off of a package of batteries or something, like AA batteries or something. And I'll just wrap it around the wire and then put it in the alligator clip of the helping hands. And then I'm going to go ahead and tin this wire here. Alright, so I went ahead and cut away while I was tinning the wire there. And basically just to save on some time on my video, but I'm trying to shorten these things up for you guys because I know it drives some of you guys crazy. But at any rate, let's see if I can get it in focus here. So I just tinned this wire, and as you can see, there are no alligator teeth marks in it whatsoever. So that's just a handy little tip for you guys there. And now I'm going to get my Deans connector back out here. I apologize that this isn't a very good angle, but it's hard to get the camera in a good angle and keep the Deans at an angle that is easy for me to work with. Alright, that'll work. So I've already got my heat shrink tubing on my wire. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tin my iron just a little. There's already plenty of tin. I have a tendency to over tin my wires and my connectors already, so okay, I apologize about that. I cut away and came back basically because I forgot to do one step and it kind of messed me up. And I actually probably should have waited on this already, but okay. So the one step that I forgot, and I actually just desoldered this and switched connectors. So I'm gonna use a different connector, give that other connector some time to cool down, because I forgot to, whenever you cut a wire and you cut a wire and then you twist it up so you get, before you get ready to tin it, it always creates this little cone here on the end. And what I like to do is go in there and cut that cone flat so that the whole piece of wire sits up against the, so the whole piece of wire will sit up against the connector. And I actually already cut part of this off, but I'm going to trim just a little bit more off. Before it was even worse, and it was like sticking out like this, and it wasn't as smooth and clean of a connection as I'd like. So I'm just going to take my dikes here. And I know you guys can't see this, I apologize, but I'm just going to cut off the end to make it nice and flat there. Make it nice and flat, so when I solder it on now, you can tell it's going to be a nice, flat, even connection there. Okay, another tip that I forgot to tell you guys. Alright, so once we get our end nice and flat, apologize for cutting away there, but I just realized I had the Deans connector upside down. I was getting ready to put this positive lead on the negative side. That would not be good. So at any rate, once we get our end trimmed up here, then we're ready to connect the wire. So I'm just going to tin my iron here. And then I'm just going to hold down until it all liquefies. Once I see it all liquefied, I'm going to remove the heat. And then hold it there for just a minute while it sets up. And then we have our connection. Now granted, this wire actually got soldered a little bit of at a little bit of an angle, but that, come on, focus camera, but that actually will not hurt anything. As you can tell, there is a totally solid connection of solder in between the end of the wire and the post, so it's really not a big deal. It's not as clean as I typically like to have it. I usually like to have them nice and flat, but trying to film this is trying to do it while I'm filming it is not an easy thing because I got a bunch of stuff in the way. So let me back out a little bit here. So then once we get the Deans soldered on the one side, then we're going to push our let's see, make sure this isn't hot anymore. We're going to push our heat shrink up and over the connection. Should back out a little bit more. And then what I like to use is one of these. It's one of those torch lighters. It actually has a torch inside of it instead of a flame. And these are really actually perfect for melting heat shrink. So then we're just going to go over this, go over our heat shrink nice and good here. Get that all shrunk down on there. And now we're ready to go back and do the black side. So now that we've got the positive side soldered on there and heat shrunk, it would be virtually impossible to short it out at this point. So now we're safe to go in and continue the job with the black side. Now you will notice that on the positive side, if you're using thick gauge wire, the wire is actually going to stick up, and this is actually very pronounced, even more so than what it should be. Like I said, because this, as you can tell, the wire got soldered on an angle. But even if it had been soldered perfectly flat, your wire is still going to stick up a little bit past the Deans connector. And what I like to do for that, just because I like to not only waterproof my Deans connectors, but I like to be safe, as I just take some liquid tape. And what I'll end up doing after I get it all soldered up and everything is I'll end up coating basically about a third, the back third of the connector, and then a good ½ inch or so of the wires, and I'll give it a very thick, generous coat around there, so basically so water can't get in there, and to make sure I cover that up as well. So I'm not going to bore you guys with the rest of it. You guys seen how, pardon me, that was my phone. You guys saw how I prepped everything. I've given you pretty much all the tips that I have for soldering Deans. They're actually very easy. Once you get the hang of it, you've done it 3 or 4 times and you got these tips, they're actually very easy and pretty fast to solder up. And I want to say they're my preferred connector, but I've never used Traxxas connectors. So you know, I can't say that these are necessarily better than Traxxas connectors. I've never used Traxxas connectors, and I never will use Traxxas connectors simply because they're much bigger than Deans, and I don't like big connectors. I don't like big bulky connectors. The only other ones that I've used that that I kind of like are the EC5 connectors, which I believe are the I want to say they're the blue connectors with the little bullet connectors inside. They're not much bigger than a Deans. There's also some yellow ones that are basically the same. I don't know if those are also EC5s or not, but those types of connectors are fine. Actually, let me just take a look and see what those connectors are called real quick. Yeah, the EC5s are the blue ones, and then there's some other ones that look very similar to those that are yellow that are called XT60s. I've used one EC5 and two XT60s before, and those are okay. They're not terrible. They're not terribly hard to solder up, and they're not much bigger than the Deans, but they're just not very common. So that's why I prefer the Deans personally. At any rate, with those tips and tricks, you should be able to easily and quickly solder up your Deans connectors without damaging them, and hopefully you won't be shorting out any LiPo wires. I'm going to go ahead and call this one a wrap. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to post them up below. Use the like and dislike buttons. If you use the dislike button, though, just give me a quick shout out and say why you use the dislike button. People that use the dislike button and don't leave a comment basically get ignored. If you really don't like something on my channel and you want it to change, leave a comment as to what it is. That way, if people bring it up, maybe I'll change it. At any rate, you can also reach me via my Facebook page, which is www.facebook.com/GrayWolfStudios74. I have lots of pics and RC pics and stuff there, and I usually try to post up sales and just new products coming out and things like that. You can also reach me via my email address at GrayWolfStudios74@gmail.com. Peace.